Hi, I'm Colby Charette, and this is Holding the Light.
As long as you love, I will whisper in your ear. Little whispers you will hear. As long as you love.
I wasn't able to co-host this week's podcast, and that is truly unfortunate for me because Mom had the privilege of having a very deep conversation with an amazing mother who shared her story about a form of child loss that is often not discussed. This week's guest, Jeanine Deas, takes us back 36 years, when she was preparing for the arrival of her first child, Gabriel, only to learn she would be stillborn. She talks about her grief then and now, and shares advice for parents of these children, as she lovingly calls them, still to be born. I caught up with Jeanine after the interview, and was so struck by her directness, and I admire the way that she, for 3 decades, has been writing poetry to process her grief journey, and in doing so, help others along the way. I know you'll be inspired. Today, we are honored to hold the light with Jeanine Deas.
So welcome, Jeanine, to our first podcast interview in person, our very first. So I'm excited to have you here. And actually, it's really good to see your smiling face.
Thank you. It's good to see you, Monica.
You're also our first guest, a parent who has lost a child to stillbirth. And I think it's a very important conversation to have. It's been 36 years.
Yes, it has.
It's amazing to me since you lost Gabrielle. And we really would love to have you share that story with our listeners. So what was that like for you, navigating loss and your grief at a time when you were expecting to start a family?
It was very difficult because here we were getting ready to celebrate the birth of our child, and we were close and excited, and then learn that our baby didn't have a heartbeat and that she wasn't going to make it. So you're switching from this, enormous excitement and happiness and joy to feeling very sad. And I described it as my heart was bleeding and my soul was weeping at the loss of our child, and that I would have to go through the delivery after finding out that she had died. Incredibly, it's like the strongest feelings on both sides were colliding. Your joy was colliding with your grief.
That's really hard to separate. And how did you survive that time? Like what, can you remember anything specifically that really helped you?
I do remember that several months before, I knew I was pregnant, but several months before the time that Gabriel was to arrive, I was doing social work and I was asked to go see a woman whose baby was stillborn, and she was waiting to deliver her baby. And I sat with her, not knowing what to say, what to do. I just sat with her, and she talked about her plans when the baby arrived, that she wanted to hold her baby, she wanted to dress her baby, she wanted to just have pictures taken and just have everything in that little amount of time that she could capture of her baby. And I held that, not knowing that, I shouldn't say I held it, but I came back to it, not knowing that
you were going to experience it
myself. And that was one of the strengths that got me through as I watched her go through it.
That's amazing. You once told me that the life cycle is measured in years, not the quality of life. Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, in our culture, we tend to measure life in years, and it's not necessarily the years that matter. It's that the life existed, that the child was born and lived and died, they completed their life cycle. And for Gabrielle, she completed her life cycle in my womb, but she completed her life cycle.
And you wrote about that, right?
I did.
Yeah. We should talk about that too, because I think one of the things that's probably helped you a lot is journaling, writing. You're an accomplished writer yourself of children's books and poems. And yeah, is that something that's been really healing for you?
The journaling, very much so. I think that was part of my grief work right there, was being able to capture what I was feeling, what I was experiencing, then having it as part of processing my loss and figuring out where I was going to go from there.
And isn't it good to look back on those things now?
Yeah.
To really remember how you felt.
Yeah, that is so true. Because over time, and it's been 36 years, things are hard to recall as they happen. And some things we don't need to recall anymore as they
That's
happened.
a very good point.
But what I found is that in writing it, I could revisit it and process it, my grief.
How soon after Gabriel's passing did you have another child?
We attended, David and I, my husband, we attended a grief support group. It was called Still to Be Born. And it was for families who had experienced the death of a baby, either miscarriage, stillborn, SIDS. And it was during the time that we were attending that support group that I found out that I was pregnant with our son, Nathaniel. And what helped was the facilitator of the group would say, stay in the present moment, celebrate this life that's growing inside of you, and stay in the present moment. That helped with the fears of what could happen and the reminder of what had happened. And so by focusing on the here and now and celebrating this life growing inside of me, that right now I celebrate this life, helped me through that pregnancy. Whenever my mind would wander and worry, I would bring myself back to the present moment.
That's pretty powerful. So you'd recommend support groups then? They work for people and they don't for others, of course.
That's true. And it did work for me. David probably attended a couple and then chose not to come. And for me, it got me through those 9 months of what was a very anxious time.
Yeah. And that's a really good point to bring up too, is that people grieve so differently.
Monica, that is so true. It's so unique to the individual experiencing it. And David and I did go for some grief counseling as a couple. And he would say, I don't know what to do when she's losing it. Mm-hmm. And the counselor said, well, describe what that looks like when Jeanine's losing it. And he said, well, she just cries and cries and cries. And I don't know how to console her. And the counselor said, oh, David, that's not Jeanine losing it. That's Jeanine grieving and having her feelings and processing through her tears.
Wow. I'm glad that he was there to hear that, right? It's so hard to express that way.
Yeah. And for me to understand that he may not be showing his grief visibly, but of course, he was grieving.
Yeah. I think we need to respect that about each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How do you remember Gabrielle now? Do you mark her anniversary of her passing? Or is it an anniversary of her? Is it a birth? Do you call it? Is it, celebrating a birthday? How does that? How does that feel?
Early on, I found that those anniversary dates were hard, especially the first year, the first time for everything, the first Mother's Day. I had a baby, my baby died. Am I still a mother without a child? Will people acknowledge that I was a mother? And I did receive a Mother's Day card from my mother.
Oh.
Who was one of the 4 that witnessed Gabrielle at her arrival. And you asked me if I call it birth.
Yeah.
And for me, knowing that my baby died before she arrived, it's hard to use the word birth. I say arrival. She arrived quietly. And so to get back to your question about, how do I remember her? Someone asked me, because we moved shortly after Gabrielle died, we relocated. And someone said, does it feel moving away from Maine? Does it feel like you're leaving your baby behind because she was buried here in Maine? And I thought about that and I thought, no, because taking her with me, I didn't experience her outside of my womb alive. And that's that part of she lived inside of me. And I think of her as always being with me. I'm not sure if I'm answering.
You are.
What you're
asking.
Asking.
It's very reflective, actually. I don't think people see it that way sometimes.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Did anyone ever make you feel like your child didn't live, so you didn't experience the same thing I did by losing a child?
I know people said things based on not having awareness or understanding of what it's like to experience your child growing inside of you and being with you, and the dreams that you have for your child, and then to lose your child. That does not in any way minimize your experience of this life and your child. And so you learn to accept that people often say things that help them to feel comfortable in the situation. Maybe can be hurtful, but they don't know that they're hurting you.
They don't intend, right?
They don't intend.
Yeah.
So I have forgiveness for that. I remember, and this was a clinical social worker who was a friend. She wasn't a clinical social worker to me, but she was a friend. And the first time I went to the grocery store after losing Gabrielle and recovering, I'm walking through the grocery store and I see this friend, only like really quickly, because I see her turning the other way and running around the corner at the end of the aisle. And I know it's her, and I also know that she's avoiding me. And I think it's hard to be with people who've lost a child. I think we don't know what to say or what to do, and we don't necessarily want to get close to those feelings that this could have been me. This could have been my child.
Right. It's the I can't imagine, because we were there once where you can't imagine what it might feel like to lose your child. And nor do you want anyone to feel what you have experienced.
I so agree with that. I know for me, pregnancies of other people, when they happen, and you learn that someone is pregnant and you want to be excited for them, and you are excited for them, but you're also guarded and cautious and careful what you say. And you're kind of are waiting to exhale when their baby arrives safely.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
And you're no longer naive about what the risks are, you know.
Well, losing a child shakes your security in so many ways. All the things that felt safe suddenly could happen. And you feel it with your other children in the way you protect them.
And that is something also that's important, is that for children, for parents who've lost a baby and then go on to have another child, everything that you're saying happens. You want to protect this child, and you know that it's not always within your control. I remember Nathaniel was about 4 years old. This is our son who was born after Gabriel died, and it was about a year and a half after we lost Gabriel that we had Nathaniel. And I'm going to kind of divert a little bit here. When I found out I was pregnant with Nathaniel, it was, again, I was excited and I was scared and everything. It was when we were trying to decide about having another baby that he said this. You know, we had an ectopic pregnancy, and then we had Gabriel, who was stillborn, and then we had a miscarriage. And for me, I was feeling like, this is enough. I don't want to go through this anymore without knowing that I can have a baby at the end of experiencing this is hard. And
emotionally, it's so taxing.
And so I said to Dr. Keating, as he was leaving the examining room, telling me after that miscarriage that you can still go on to have another child. He said, your first child was ectopic, your second was your baby Gabriel, stillborn, and you've had a miscarriage. Those are 3 unrelated losses, pregnancy losses. It does not mean that you cannot successfully have a healthy baby. And he started to go out the door, and I said to him, but I'm feeling like 3 strikes, and I'm out. And he turned around and he said, you can always start a new ball game.
Oh, wow. That obviously that has stayed with you.
Sure has. And it was shortly after that we found out that we were pregnant with Nathaniel. We had actually started talking about adoption, and then we found out that I was carrying.
You were signing up for the new ball game is what you were doing.
I was signing up for the new ball game. But what I was going to say about Nathaniel at age 4, going for first time having swimming lessons. And so I bring him to the Boys and Girls Club, and they're calling the kids in, and I'm marching in right behind Nathaniel, and a hand goes up. And the instructor said, stop right there, Mom. That's as far as you can come. And I'm like, what do you mean this is as far as I can come? I said, well, parents wait outside. It's easier for the instructors and for the kids if the parents aren't here. And my heart started racing. He closed the door, and I sat on the step right outside the door, the stairway that was there. And I had some paper and pencil with me, and I started journaling what I was feeling.
Oh, yeah.
And it's exactly what you said, Monica, is that we will forever have the fear of the potential for danger and us not being able to protect our child.
Right. That's what we're here for, right? Is to love and protect our children.
Yeah.
And when you lose that sense of being able to do that, it changes your perspective. You have these irrational fears that I know my friends look at me like, why wouldn't you let Colby go do that right now? Because of the fear that is forever.
That never goes away. That never goes away.
Yeah.
We had a neighbor who I would say to her, she was a dear friend, a neighbor, like, sometimes I don't know if what I'm doing is normal, that parents think this or do this, or if it's because I've lost a child that I'm thinking and doing this. So she would be my little, like, gauge there and say, okay, is this normal, or is this, no, Jeanine, this is not normal. Oh. Let him go sleep over his friend's house.
Right.
Those kinds of experiences that you have, because you're always hypervigilant
Yeah.
for your living child, because you have lost a child.
And no one understands that
No.
unless you've lost a child. And that's what we want. We want listeners to reflect on that,
Mm-hmm.
that they're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping with every conversation that we have that people feel like, yeah, that's how I feel.
And it's so important because we don't have a lot of opportunities to listen to and talk with others, unless you've been in a support group.
Mm.
And at some point that ends, you don't stay in the support group forever. Or
Right.
maybe you do. Maybe you decide this is where I get to talk about my experience and my child, and that my child is real. Again, that'll take me down another road where a friend was celebrating her son's birthday, who is about the age that Gabrielle would be if she were living. And she would be 36. This was last year. She would have been 35. And my friend was talking about her son's birthday, and she was recalling his birth and how it's her birthday as well as his birthday and everything. And I said to her, people don't understand that whether your child is living and is with you or has passed, that you celebrate their birthdays. You remember. You will always remember. What's not normal is not remembering.
Very well said. Absolutely. And you've had 36 years to really reflect on all of this, right? It's different for you than it is for somebody that's just experienced stillbirth. Did you ask yourself, why me?
Yeah. That question haunts people. It haunted me. Someone gave me a book early on when I lost Gabrielle, and it was When Bad Things Happen to Good People, written by Rabbi Harold Kirshner. And he talks about that question, why, and how that is a question that we never adequately get answered. Doctors can tell you what happened, how it happened. Nobody can tell us why it happened. And the why doesn't get answered. And sometimes it gets us stuck in our grief as we try to understand why. And there's nothing that makes sense. So he suggests in this book to ask a different question. Rather than, why has this happened to me, to my family, to my child? To ask, now that this has happened, where do I go from here? And I know for me, that was the turning point in my healing from my loss, was when I could look forward and I could carry Gabrielle forward, my experience with her, and not have it be like a martyr kind of thing, but like, what can I do with this that is life-sustaining, that is giving hope and giving courage? That led me to the Center for Grieving Children.
Yeah, talk about that. That's a great resource that I don't think people really know about or know enough about.
So it was Gabrielle died in 86. Nathaniel was born later in 87. And we moved back to Maine in 89. And it was hearing something on the television about this program, the Center for Grieving Children, and they were looking for volunteers. And I immediately said, I want to do this. I want to volunteer with children who've experienced a death. And again, not everyone thinks that's a good idea. And David didn't think that was a good idea. And, he said, that's sad, and that's painful. And do you want to go back to feeling those feelings? I went, oh, I can't go back to feel those feelings. Those feelings are always there. But if I can help another child, another person, in this case, children, to talk about their loss, to share their memories of whoever their person was that died, then that's going to be part of my healing and my growth. And I remember, Monica, I hadn't thought about this, but I remember as a volunteer, we would meet before and after to process what happens in the groups. And on one particular evening, with the children were 6 to 10 years old, you usually facilitated with another person. But on this particular evening, that person was out. So I was facilitating the group alone. And we were talking about our stories. And there were like starter words for the story. And then the children would fill it in. And then they got to share after, like, this is my story about, and I remember this about. And so it went on that way. And then if I could tell this person anything, this is what I would want to say. And so the children were filling out theirs and talking. And this one little boy said, are you going to write your story to me?
Oh, wow. I love that.
And I said, I can. And so I started to write, this is my story about Gabrielle and what I remember and whatnot. And at the end, the children shared theirs, and they asked me if I would share mine. And it became quite emotional, and I teared up. And one of the kids, what we would do at the end of the time together is we do a circle with whoever seemed to really need the support the most would be in the middle of our goodbye circle at the end. So they chose me to be in the middle of the goodbye circle. But our stories ended up on the wall in the facilitator's room where we would debrief after. And this one person said to me, when I introduced myself, to this new person, she said, oh, you're Gabrielle's mother.
Oh.
Words that I never thought as a mother who had a stillborn would ever hear from somebody, is that you're Gabrielle's mother.
Wow.
So that was an example of how she impacted my life and was impacting others' lives by me telling my story and sharing her, keeping her alive in my life and introducing her to other people, because those are words I never thought I would hear from somebody.
That's really powerful. I was going to ask you too, how do you keep her spirit alive with your other children? And how do you share her story?
The first book that I wrote, the first children's book that I wrote, was called Anna's Little Buddy. And it was while I was doing the volunteering at the Center for Grieving Children. And I know that story was written about the friendship between my son, Nathaniel, and our next door neighbor, Anna. But it was really also about my story with Gabrielle and my grief journey. That's why the book existed, because everything led to everything that had happened with my loss led to this time in my life. So writing certainly is one of the ways that I keep her memory alive. Supporting other people who are going through difficult times with losses is another way that she's right there with me. On Christmas, I remember the first Christmas, she arrived in February 16th of 86, and that Christmas following, I remember writing, journaling about, is this the first Christmas without our child? And this is hard. But what's even more difficult is realizing that we will spend the rest of our lives celebrating Christmas without our child. So I that year lit a candle and had family gathering, and I made a point to say this candle is lit in memory of our baby, Gabrielle. And I would do that every Christmas, is light a candle. At some point, I stopped doing it as part of the family gathering, but a personal, private candle lighting for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so at some point during that Christmas, whether it be in the morning or the evening or Christmas Eve, the candle would be lit and I would have my remembrance of Gabrielle.
That's so neat. I can completely relate to that. We light a candle at dinner time, and we have for 7.5 years, because it just feels like Cassidy's at the table with us as long as that candle is lit. And everybody has their own thing, right, that they use or practice to keep their loved one present.
It's those rituals
Mm-hmm.
that are so meaningful and they so connect us. And it's like, that invisible string, that love connection that's there. And it's so important to have those rituals.
Whatever they are.
Whatever.
Whatever they are. Exactly.
Yeah. And so, Monica, when you say that, I think about something else that came out of my experience with having a child die. And it started at the Center for Grieving Children, and I kept it going long after, and I still do it, is I do holiday memorials. And it's a verse, it's like a poem, a remembrance. It's called the Holiday Memorial, that I've shared with people over the years. And it's a verse, and it has 4 candles. And, some people choose to do the lighting of the candles with their family or friends. Others light them privately, and some just keep the verse out as a reminder of, their person being with them. So that came about from my experience with being at the Center for Grieving Children, and of my own loss, is how important it is for us and others to remember.
And I was a recipient of that, of your generosity and kindness, because I remember the candles arriving at my home. I don't remember a lot that happened then, but I do remember that arriving, and we still have it and still light them. So
yeah.
Let me ask this question then. What would you say to a family that is experiencing this now? If you could go back and reflect on a younger you and say, what would you say to that family now about the road that lies ahead for them?
First of all, recognizing that each experience is unique to the person living it, and that what my experience was may not be this person's experience. And for me to be careful not to project onto them, anything, and I guess I would want them to be with their feelings, to honor their feelings, to allow themselves to have their feelings and allow themselves to grieve their loss, to surround themselves with people who will accept their journey and not try to fix it for them, not try to take it away from them, take their pain away from them, to just take it. Sometimes it's one day at a time, sometimes it's one moment at a time, and that whatever you're feeling is okay, and to trust yourself. And maybe it is talking with others that have experienced a loss that will give you hope. You will see this continuum, and you may be at the start of your grief journey, and you'll hopefully get to see others who have moved along their journey and have healed.
Mm.
There's never fully healing from the death of a child. You don't get over it. You don't heal from it. You incorporate it into your life, and it's this new norm. But your child goes with you wherever you go. Always. What you learn to do is integrate that loss into your life and to find hope for the future.
Well, you certainly are the epitome of giving hope to people like me and lots of parents who have to, unfortunately, experience this. So I really, really appreciate you being here and being so courageous and sharing your story.
Thank you, Monica. No one can take this truth away from us. We carried our children within us, for however long each of us did. Some of us heard our baby's heartbeat. Some of us saw a sonogram of our baby. Some of us felt the moving and the kicking of our baby within. Some of us rocked our baby as we held our big, beautiful bellies, our babies. And when our baby arrived, some of us saw our baby for the first and only time. Some of us held our baby, touched, caressed, and loved our baby with every fiber of our being. And what we felt was more real than what some people experience in a lifetime. No one, no other human can take this truth away from us.
As long as you love.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this podcast helpful, please share our link with others and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. I'm Monica Charette, reminding you that you are never alone in your grief. Until next time, we'll be right here with you, holding the light.
As long as you love.